Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I'm glad you could join me. Make sure that you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com. And don't forget the America's Founding series, where we explore forgotten patriots who have been lost through history because of a failed public education system. And I have to say, speaking of failed public education systems, I want to welcome today's guest, because I have Sam Sorbo, host of the Sam Sorbo Show, and also author of the brand new book, Parents' Guide to Homeschool, Making Education Easy and Fun. Sam, welcome to the program. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. I love the intro, the failures of the public school system, and I'd like to introduce people to a new concept, perhaps to them, that the schools aren't failing, that they are doing exactly what they were supposed to do, and we're the dupes thinking that, oh shoot, if we could only make them work.
That's certainly true, and when we look at how they have created an entire generation that knows virtually nothing. I mean, I'm in the college classroom each and every day. Every semester, I give the citizenship exam to my students. Every semester, out of 250 students, only a handful will pass that citizenship exam. What do you think the intent is to keep this failed system going for so long?
Yeah, well, look, if you just look at the results and you understand that they are professionals, they're not just screwing up. They're doing what they are setting out to do, which is to dumb us down. And it's more than a generation, frankly. And we've all seen the videos of, young people on the street, ask questions. What's the capital of France? And they say, I don't know, Germany or whatever. I mean, these people are virtual idiots, and they are the result of our modern schools. So then we have to go back and say, well, if that's the case, then there must be some nefariousness in here. There must be something that's the incentive to render people unable to use their brains, which is really what we have now. And more than that, the schools actually disincentivize learning. They don't want the child to learn. They want the child to practice rote memorization because that's useful for a worker bee, but they don't want the child thinking. And so we're in this conundrum where we've been rendered incapable of thought. We have enough thought to say, there's something wrong here, but not enough thought to say, I should do something about that. And so that's what my book is about. It's really to encourage parents that they are enough, that they can be the lead educators or the guides or the navigators for their children. And in fact, the system has told us that we can't, because that's job security for them. That's like the plumber that comes to your house. He could show you that you can unclog the drain simply by lifting the stopper and pulling out the wad of hair that's stuck in there. But that's not job security for him. So he says, okay, leave it to me. You can leave now so you don't see what he's doing. And then he simply pulls out the stopper, and then he sits down and reads a magazine for half an hour so that you think that he was working that whole time, right? And that's what we have in our schools. It takes 8 hours a day. It doesn't take 8 hours a day to educate a child. And you need all of these books, and you need the teacher, and you need the blackboard, and you need the desks, and you need the stool. It takes none of that, actually. And if we just go back a little over 100 years, when we didn't have schools, we would realize people were all autodidacts. People were all self-taught. The only limitations on them, too, one, their curiosity. And granted, some people are less curious than others, and they just didn't learn as much. And two, their access to information. Well, today, our access to information is off the charts. The information is all there. It's right there on the computer. It's on the phone. It's on the internet. It's all available. And in fact, it's available very inexpensively, which is why it's such a conundrum to me that we are offering homeschool families thousands of dollars a year. It doesn't cost thousands of dollars a year to homeschool a child, but we've been trained in our schools to worship money. And so the moment that you attach a hefty number to a dollar figure that's going out, you get people's interest. And that's where we are today.
Well, I always love in the education system how they say, if we just had more money, when the truth is we've been increasing investments in education each and every year, and the results are worse than ever. But in your book, you say something so important. You emphasize the importance of actually defining education. So what do you believe education should be, and how is that different from what children are experiencing today in the traditional public school system?
It's such a great question. I mean, it is the beginning of the entire discussion. And that's why my book starts with it, is let's talk about let's define our terms. Well, I want an education for my child, so I'm going to send him to school. But we already see schools don't educate, right? Because our definition of education is different from theirs. Let's put that out there. And then let's talk about that. What is our definition of education? Well, we want our children to grow up to be smart. Okay, smart. What does that mean? Well, we want them to be wise. Okay. Do they teach wisdom in school? No. Just no. In fact, they teach the opposite. They teach you can change your gender. They teach you can poop in a litter box in the hallway if you think you're a cat. They don't teach wisdom. They don't teach discernment. They don't teach, one of the things that I love to point out is they teach pros and cons lists in schools for decision making. And it is the absolute 180-degree wrong way of making a decision. Have you ever made a pros and cons list? You end up with a list of pros and a list of cons and no clarity, because now you just have two lists of good things and bad things, and you're still stuck with what's the decision. What they ought to be teaching, but they don't, is priorities, because priorities require discernment. And discernment is discrimination. And they don't want discrimination. Discrimination is very bad, which then sort of carries over into this idea that discernment is bad, which of course it isn't, right? We make discernments every day. If you like vanilla rather than strawberry, well, you're discriminating. You're discriminating against strawberry. But it is your prerogative. You have a palate that prefers vanilla. So we understand that, but we won't carry it into sort of our real lives. We won't. So what I try to tell people is, if you make a list of priorities and you start making decisions based on priorities, every decision becomes a binary choice. It's either on or off. It's a 0 or a 1. It's an A or it's a B. But you just go down your list of priorities. If your number one priority is, well, I want my children to grow up to be happy, productive people, don't put them in the system, because the system will screw them up. And 90% of children get screwed up in the system. And then they're left the rest of their lives trying to deal with that damage that's been done to them. I would say that the system of schooling, the institution, as bad as it is, and I don't believe in it, and I have evidence to support that. But there are maybe 10%, probably not as much as 10% of children who thrive in that atmosphere, who thrive in the very structured, ordered, this is what you need to do, check these boxes. They're academic, and they want that structure. And so for those kids, the system is, aces, but not necessarily for their mental health. And that's a second thing that doesn't figure into education. We never consider the child's mental health when we're talking about, well, I want my child to get an education. It doesn't occur to us what damage is done to the child by, one, separating them from the family all day, which we still haven't come to grips with. And it's the decimation of the family in our culture. And we see the detritus everywhere. We see the broken families everywhere, but we will never well, I shouldn't say never, but up till now, we have never been able to go and point at the schools as being the culprit because we all went through school for 13 years and we were trained to believe that school is good. And so what happens is everything that is good comes from the school and everything that is bad is me personally. So I can't do math. I just don't have a math brain. That's on me. That's not the school's fault, right? But that's a lie because it is the school's fault that I think I don't have a math brain. There is no such thing as a math brain. It's like saying I don't have a French brain because I can't speak French. It's ridiculous. If you wanted to speak French, you needed to sit down and learn French. It's not that hard. You have a brain. Your brain can learn. And so, the reason that I'm not an artist is I don't have the patience to sit and do art. I don't have the interest to sit and do art. And that's fair, right? Some people do art and they love it and that they will sit for hours on end and do their art. I don't do that, but I would sit for hours on end and do math because I lied. I have a math brain. I love math, right? But I hated writing. I hated writing in school because school taught me that I was one or the other. You can't be both. That's another thing. That's a lie in our schools. So in my book, I go through all these lies because we really need to identify the numerous lies that are baked into the system. And by the way, I don't go after teachers. This is not the teacher's fault. I mean, there are good teachers, there are bad teachers, and sometimes the teachers do things that they might not even know might be bad. For instance, any kind of criticism of a child could be that child's worst day. You just don't know. You don't know until the child turns 16 and says to you, Mom, I realized that kindergarten was when I learned I was stupid. And it was because the teacher laughed that one time.
Teachers could have a profound effect on students. And in your book, a lot of parents know that there's something wrong with the public education system. They see it every day, especially COVID. It really revealed how bad the schools are. But a lot of people, parents in particular, feel overwhelmed by the idea of homeschooling. And your book tackles this question. So what do you say to those who fear that, one, they're not qualified to teach their own children, two, they may not have the patience to teach their own children?
Okay, so the first of those questions, I mean, that is why I'm just throw it here. That's why I wrote this book, is to show you that you are more than qualified because you're not the teacher. Nobody's the teacher. This is where they've really pulled the wool over our eyes in the schools, okay? Because you and I and parents today all went K through 12. We absorbed the idea that paradigm is the correct paradigm. Teacher teaches, student sits like a baby bird, waiting to be fed information. That is not education. That's its own thing. That's school. But that's not education. So when we're talking about home education, it's an entirely different beast. And so what I do in the book is first I tell you, I try to identify all of the lies that I've seen come out of that system, like the teacher teaches, like learning is hard. Learning's not hard. Learning is the most enjoyable thing almost in the world. We typically love to learn. We just hate school, right? It's a completely different thing. Your kids love to learn. And by the way, you love to teach, because when you taught your child to tie his shoe and he learned it, it was like a great day. It was a day to go get ice cream because little Johnny learned to tie his shoe, and I'm feeling pretty good about myself because I showed him how to do it, right? And so we need to carry that idea through the rest of education, which is not school. And so when you do that, you start to realize, and I'll tell you a quick story. When my daughter was 11, I realized that she's an artist, very much an artist, and I have no knowledge of art. I never took art history. I never really cared, that much about it. Like, it just wasn't my thing. And so I realized that I needed some help because I wasn't going to be able to teach her, because I still had that paradigm in my head that I was the teacher. And I was thinking, I can teach my son who's an engineer because I went to school for engineering. Like that, I've got covered. so much, but not the art stuff. And a friend of mine said, well, maybe an anatomy class. And I thought, yes, perfect. I will delegate. I will find an anatomy teacher, and then she will be able to, further her art studies. And I ran up to her room, and mind you, she was 11. And she gave me this sort of, well, bless your heart. And she showed me the interior of her sketchbook. And she had been drawing the human anatomy for a while and labeling it. And I looked at her and I said, you're teaching yourself anatomy? And she said, well, yeah, mommy. I mean, if I want to be an artist, I have to know anatomy. Like, duh. And so my point is, if you allow your child the freedom and access to the proper materials, they will teach themselves because they are driven to learn. Children are driven to learn. They are driven by that curiosity. And it is child abuse to put them in a classroom and tell them to sit down and shut up and not to ask questions because you have to you need permission to ask a question in a classroom. That, to me, that's child abuse. And like I said, maybe 10% of the children are like, ooh, that's what I want. But you won't know unless you force them all to do that. And by the time you start to weed through the kids who really engage with that, you've already turned off the other children from learning. And that's why we have so many stupid people today.
It really is a problem. Our education system has certainly morphed into one that's based on obedience and compliance.
Well, it's a school system. It's
and
not
that the
an
government is
education
in
system.
charge, that's for sure. But what about the parents? Let's face it. If parents are sitting there doing homework with their children, checking it, if they're considering, sending their kids to private school or homeschooling, we know those are involved parents. What about those children that come from neglectful homes? I mean, you brought up family early on in this podcast episode, and we've seen the breakdown of the family. So what happens with them? Because obviously those parents, the absent parents, the neglectful parents, the single mother may be working 2 jobs. How do we get them more involved? And that's a tough question to answer, but.
Well, you're talking social engineering, right? And I'm not going to go into social engineering. I don't believe in it. But I think that the schools have done a terrible disservice to the public by encouraging the decimation of the family. And that is, in a sense, look, it started way back in the 40s and the 50s when dad left the home to go to work, came home tired, and we were putting our kids in school. The mothers were home getting bored, but they were still seeing the kids because they were home. And so the kids still had that one parent, and then dad came home and they might sit down to dinner, but we slowly eroded that. Then moms went to work. Then there was no dinner. There was no sitting down. And so now we have broken families left, right, and center. That said, I know single parents, single moms who have educated their children themselves without ever sending them to school and worked full time because it's not a full-time job to, quote, educate your child or, let's say, to school your child, right? So there's school, and we can talk about school as if school was the academics, which it isn't anymore. But the school that we're meaning is the 3 R's, which that's a lie, of course, because they're not 3 R's, but the academics, right? That's what we're thinking of when we say school. We want our children to get an education. We want them to go to school to learn academics. Okay. So if we're just talking the academics, that's an hour out of the parent's day. That's an hour. Childcare, that's different. And so a single parent who is working does need to arrange some kind of childcare, but that doesn't have to be school. So that's separate, right? And, you asked me before about the parents who lack the patience. And, I have a pretty harsh response to that because I don't think that we should be so eager to announce to the world that we lack one of the virtues, because the opposite of patience is anger. And so people who admit, oh, I just don't have the patience, are actually admitting to an anger issue. And my response is usually, are you seeing somebody to help you with your anger issues? When we so just cavalierly say, well, we lack this virtue, I mean, we really ought to think more about that. And perhaps God gave your children to teach you patience. Perhaps your children are there so that you can learn some patience. It's a virtue. It's something that you need to work on. It's not something that you just say, oh, I'm flawed, never going to fix that. That's like saying, well, I'm a drunk, but I'm just going to keep drinking because there's just nothing I can do about it. I mean, seriously, really? That's how much we value our children? I mean, look, our culture hates children. This culture that we live in today, now I'm not speaking for myself. I hope I'm not speaking for you, but this culture hates children.
Well, isn't that why they glorified abortion?
Yes, we abort them and we celebrate it. We cut off their genitalia and we call it health care, gender affirming care. We deprive them of their childhoods proudly. We send them to an institution all day. And then when they come home, they're not free. No, they have homework. They have work to do at home. That's not a childhood. And we do it with glee, like we're happy to do it. I think it's terrible. I think it's abusive. And I think that it's time that we stopped abusing our children. And so getting your child an education, here's the final sort of the crux of the whole thing. An education means to turn out a thoughtful adult. And by thoughtful, I mean somebody who can think, who can hold on to a thought, who can carry on a thought, who can have a conversation, who knows how to give and forgive and ask for forgiveness and be forgiven. That is a thoughtful adult. That's what we want. And we also want, as parents, we want relationship with our children. So the first thing we do is send them away from us to get values that don't belong to us and think that somehow we're going to continue to have a relationship with them. It's terrible. Of course, that's not going to work. And of course, that's part of why we have families that are torn apart, that can't sit together at the Thanksgiving table, etc.
It's crazy. I mean, I make sure that my children, my family has dinner every night together because I always felt that was important. No matter what's going on during the day, you come together and you talk about your day and build that relationship. And another thing that your book tackles is the idea of socialization. A lot of people that are against homeschooling say, well, kids need to socialize. But you dismantle this argument in your book. So can you explain to the audience what your response is to those that say that they don't get socialization if they're homeschooled?
Yeah, I mean, it's absurd. First of all, it's absurd to think that every child, when put into a vat of other children, will make friends, which is what they mean. Like, we'll define our terms again, right? What is socialization? What they mean is, I want my child to be captain of the football team. Like, I want my child to be the social butterfly. But maybe your child isn't a social butterfly. Maybe you have an introvert. And the worst thing for them would be to send them into a group of other children all day, every day, because that just kills them inside. Introverts don't do well that way. And we don't take any of that into account. We think that every child is the exact same as every other child. Like, I can't even, this is like shooting fish in a barrel. I know that we've just accepted it into our culture. And so the assumption is that school is good, but it's not. It's so bad. It's so bad on every metric. It's ridiculous on every metric. And so let's talk about the fact that your child is supposed to sit quietly and not talk to other children in class. And then the other thing is, there's the tremendous competition that happens in school. Who's dating who, and who's talking to who, and who said what to whom, and who's passing notes to who. And I mean, that's all distraction. That's totally not education. So why would we want that when ostensibly our first priority, this is back to priorities again, is education? And this is what's so funny to me and a little frustrating, is I have the conversation about education and we come to an agreement that, yes, the schools fail to educate. They fail. They don't educate. All right? Okay. But what about socialization? What about it? My number one priority is education. Therefore, I'm going to pursue education. Socialization is secondary to that. And when you keep your child home, your child learns much better social skills, because you don't actually stay home. That's the other, it's like this weird misnomer. It's not home and it's not school. So why we're calling it homeschool is absurd. Like they named it because they didn't want us doing it. So I say home education or home learning, but still it's not home. I take my child to the bank with me. He talks to the bank teller. He deposits the check. That gives him empowerment. Like he's the one that's, handing the check up onto the counter. He can't see the woman who's standing behind it. She has to lean over to see him because he's this little kid, right? So we empower our children that way. They go to the grocery store with me. They help me pick the vegetables. They talk to the cashier. And so my children are much better socialized than children who spend all day in a vat of their peer group. And by the way, I mean, this is another one of the abuses, and I didn't go into this in my book, but when you go into a classroom, you can ask any child in that classroom who fulfills what role, because children take on roles in the classroom and they label themselves. And so my daughter labeled herself the stupid one that day in kindergarten. She thought, okay, that's my role. I'm the stupid one. But if you ask, you'll say, who's the smart one? Oh, that's Charlie. He's really bright. Who's the dumb one? Oh, that's that person over there. Who's the class clown? Oh, that's Jimmy. He's always cracking jokes. Right? And that can be so detrimental to create a label for yourself at a very young age of 5 or 6 or 7, and then to carry that around with you for the rest of your life, rather than allowing adults to pour into that child and tell that child, oh no, I see you as this. I see you as that. I see you as you're a great speaker. Wow, you're actually very funny, but also very serious, And so the child gets different facets from different people, from interacting with different people in different phases of life that are not in the institution. Why we institutionalize children is a travesty. And by the way, I know that the pundits for school will say that my ideas are outmoded and outdated, just like the Constitution, by the way. But the people who wrote the Constitution, the founders of the nation, they were all home educated. They were all autodidacts. And in fact, Benjamin Franklin, who was the most famous person in the world and probably more famous even than Elvis or Michael Jackson, because of the time period that he lived in, he was an inventor. He was a publisher. He was a writer. He was a diplomat. He did everything. He was a scientist. He did everything. And he never went to school. Now, Yale gave him an honorary degree because they cheat. So they claimed him even though he didn't do anything there. They just claimed him because they cheat.
And I would argue that when we look at schools, they don't teach a lot of useful life skills. Let's be honest about that. Taking your child to the bank with you and having them learn how to give change rather than a cash register, telling them what change to give and how to balance a checkbook. I mean, I think those are useful life skills that you take with you wherever you go. So I think you have a great point there. And I think that on the broader level, it's about a cultural shift, right? I mean, we need to see a larger cultural shift. This goes well beyond just academics. So, as the last question, can you explain how this is much more than just simply academics?
So you talked about a cultural shift. We definitely need a cultural shift because we've had a cultural shift. We've had a tremendous cultural shift.
Hasn't worked out too well.
I would say that the biggest part of that shift is that in our schools, we started to worship money. And so they train us to worship money as the highest value. College prep and career readiness, which is what all of our schools are about. And if you go interview at any private school, their claim to fame is where their graduates go to college, right? So it's all college prep and career readiness. And career readiness is just get a career rather than a job so you can make more money. So it's all focused on the money. So now we have a culture that rather than focus on integrity and honor and godliness, we just focus on wealth and money. And unfortunately, that has pervaded Washington. And so even our elected officials now, I don't know if you noticed, but DOGE went through, found all of this tremendous government waste, and they won't vote on it because they all have their hand in the till. Anybody who won't vote out the government waste is getting money, or they're blackmailed. And so we have a big problem. So how do we switch that back? We raise children at home with integrity, with honor, not to worship money, but to worship God. And to understand that and by the way, the other thing is the worship of money comes with this nihilistic attitude, which is also taught in schools, that we are all just accidents of nature. That's Darwinism, right? Survival of the fittest is bullying. We teach that in the schools. That's why we have a bullying problem. And you have no value except the amount of money that you earn, which is nihilism. And so young men have been deprived of purpose. Young women have been told they can have it all and be the boss girl and give away sex for free, by the way. And so young men have nothing to strive for anymore because they used to need to put a ring on it, be a protector and a provider in order to satisfy their urgings and fulfill their life's mission, which is to procreate. But now they don't have to. And so we have actually less young people having sex today because it's too easy, and it's actually now made more easy online. And 10% of Gen Z women are on OnlyFans, which means that they're whoring themselves, which is, they're making a lot of money, but they literally have no value anymore. And they feel it, which is very sad. And that's nihilism also. And so the cultural shift that's really happened is this nihilistic attitude as opposed to a godly attitude of understanding that everybody has a purpose.
And I think that's so important. When we look at this idea of money, we have more money and stuff than ever before, and yet people are more miserable than ever before.
Well, and you say, what about the families that can't afford to homeschool? It doesn't cost that much to homeschool. Maybe you need to make some concessions in your personal life in order to have a relationship with your children and in order for them to grow up as healthy individuals. But I tell you, if you start with my book and make positive choices, make some strong decisions, you can have it. You can have the best. You can't have it all, but you can have the best.
And in life, that's a good lesson for kids. You can't have it all. So we need to teach adults that as well. Sam, I really appreciate you coming on, and everyone needs to check out Parents Guide to Homeschool, Making Education Easy and Fun. Check out the Sam Sorbo Show. I'll have links up at the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com. Sam, I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at pasreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.